In the heart of a thunderous blockbuster premiere, a colossal green-skinned behemoth crashes through a gleaming skyscraper, muscles rippling like twisted steel cables under neon lights, roaring defiance at a swarm of drones buzzing like angry hornets. The crowd below screaming in orchestrated chaos as the hero's eyes glow with primal fury, fists pounding the pavement into craters that swallow cars whole. But then smash cut to a sun-baked plain 5,000 years earlier, where a clay tablet unearthed from the dusty ruins of ancient Uruk crumbles slightly in an archaeologist's gloved hands, its cuneiform wedges whispering the name. Enkidu, a wild man forged from river mud and divine spit, the original rage monster, who made gods tremble and kings question their thrones long before any comic book ink ever dried. Picture this: Enkidu as the MCU's Hulk, before Bruce Banner ever tripped over a gamma bomb, a shaggy, untamed force of nature who could bench press an ox cart and turn a cedar forest into kindling with one bad mood swing. Or imagine him striding onto the screen in a Zack Snyder cut of the Epic of Gilgamesh, slow-motion dust clouds billowing as he locks eyes with a golden-armored tyrant, the way Kratos glares at Olympus in God of War, every footstep a bass drop that rattles the audience's rib cages. Think of the Netflix adaptation where Enkidu's origin story opens with a drone shot gliding over endless wheat fields, the camera swooping down to find him wrestling a pride of lions like Simba gone feral in a live-action Lion King remix. He's the original Doom guy, spawned in the wild to curb humanity as overpowered monarch, the way id Software coded the demons to balance the Marine as arsenal. Hell, drop him into the Witcher series and he's Geralt's long-lost brother, hair matted with monster blood, grunting monosyllabic wisdom between gulps of fermented mare's milk. And if Disney ever got their hands on him, they'd give him a wisecracking sidekick jackal and a ballad sung by a gravelly voiced Idina Menzel, turning the tragedy of his death into a tear-jerking montage that still somehow sells plush toys. These aren't stretches. They're echoes, because every larger-than-life hero, Hollywood pumps out owes rent to the clay-baked titan who first taught storytellers that raw power plus raw heart equals box office gold. Long before Uruk's ziggurat pierced the heavens like a Bronze Age Burj Khalifa, the city swelled with the smells of baking bread, sweating asphalt made of bitumen, and the copper tang of blood from the morning sacrifices. Gilgamesh, 2/3 god and 1/3 mortal ego, ruled as king, his palace walls glazed in lapis lazuli that caught the sunrise like a Snapchat filter. He was the original trust fund demigod, bench-pressing cedar beams for fun, betting every bride on her wedding night, because the fine print of kingship apparently allowed it, and building walls so thick they laughed at siege engines. The people grumbled, but who could protest when the guy could snap a war chariot in half? The gods lounging on their cloud couches heard the complaints and decided to cook up a counterweight. Anu, the Sky Father, told Aruru, goddess of creation, to pinch a lump of clay from the riverbank, spit in it for flavor, and mold a mirror image of Gilgamesh's strength minus the crown polish. Out of the wet earth rose Enkidu, hair cascading like a lion's mane, body corded with muscle that hadn't yet learned the concept of gym memberships, eyes wild as a dust storm rolling off the step. He didn't walk. He bounded, knees high, fists pumping, tasting freedom in every lungful of wind that carried the scent of acacia blossoms and distant lion musk. For years, Enkidu lived among the beasts, lapping water beside gazelles, their delicate hooves clicking on sun-cracked clay while he gnawed raw antelope haunch, juice dripping down a chest furred like a bear rug. His laughter was a guttural bark that sent flocks of starlings exploding into the sky like black confetti. He wrestled lions for dominance, rolling in the dirt until both man and cat panted in mutual respect, the big cats eventually curling beside him at night, their breath warm against his ribs. Hunters setting snares found their traps sprung and their game liberated. Hoofprints mingled with bare human feet twice the size of any city dweller. Word reached Gilgamesh. some naked wildman was tanking the royal hunting quotas. The king, never one to outsource his alpha status, sent Shamhat, a temple harlot whose perfume could make a eunuch blush. She found Enkidu at a watering hole, moonlight silvering the sweat on his shoulders, and for 6 days and 7 nights they tangled in the reeds, her fingernails carving half-moons into his back, his growl softening into moans that tasted of river water and crushed mint. When they finally parted, the gazelles bolted at his approach. The lions snarled instead of nuzzling, and Enkidu stood alone, suddenly aware of the itch of civilization crawling under his skin like fleas. But then, here's the twist. The same act that humanized him also weaponized him, because Shamhat whispered tales of a city where a tyrant needed a reality check, and Enkidu felt the first hot pulse of purpose in his veins. He marched toward Uruk, sandals fashioned from palm fronds slapping against calves thick as date palms, the horizon shimmering with heat mirages that looked suspiciously like middle fingers from the gods. Gilgamesh, meanwhile, dreamed prophetic nightmares, a meteor crashing outside the city, an axe lying in the street that every citizen wanted to hug. His mother, the goddess Ninsun, interpreted the omens with the weary sigh of a parent explaining TikTok to a grandkid. The meteor was Enkidu, the axe his weaponized friendship. The wild man reached the city gates at dusk, the walls glowing amber under torchlight, and blocked the threshold just as Gilgamesh strutted out for his nightly constitutional of bride defiling. The two locked eyes, Gilgamesh in chased bronze armor that clinked like wind chimes, Enkidu in nothing but dust and righteous fury. Without a word they collided, foreheads cracking together with a sound like pottery shattering in a kill. Gilgamesh swung a fist that could topple obelisks. Enkidu caught it midair, knuckles grinding, sweat flying in slow-motion droplets that caught the torchlight like tiny suns. They grappled through the market, overturning stalls of pomegranates that burst underfoot in red explosions, traders diving aside as clay jars of sesame oil shattered and slickened the cobblestones into a skating rink of chaos. The fight spilled into the main square, Enkidu lifting Gilgamesh overhead and hurling him through a wall of the palace brewery, clouds of fermenting beer foam billowing out like a frat party gone nuclear. But then here's the twist. Neither could gain the upper hand, muscles trembling, lungs burning, until Enkidu slipped on a puddle of spilled date wine and Gilgamesh pinned him, only to realize the wild man was laughing a deep belly rumble that shook centuries of royal entitlement loose from the king's bones. Dawn found them sitting amidst the wreckage, sharing a skin of warm beer, bruises blooming like purple lotuses across their torsos. Friendship ignited faster than pitch on a torch. Gilgamesh saw in Enkidu the brother he never had. Enkidu saw in Gilgamesh the tether that kept the wild from swallowing him whole. They swore oaths under the rising sun, blood from split knuckles mingling on a shard of pottery, the scent of yeast and copper sealing the pact. But peace bored them quicker than a reboot sequel. Gilgamesh proposed they chop down the sacred cedar forest guarded by Humbaba, a monster whose roar could liquefy courage and whose face was a roadmap of nightmares. Enkidu hesitated. The forest had been his childhood playground, its resinous breath the perfume of his freedom. Yet loyalty trumped nostalgia, and off they went, sandals crunching over pine needles that released bursts of sharp, clean scent with every step. The journey took weeks, campfires crackling under starfields so dense they looked photoshopped. The two trading stories, Gilgamesh bragging about palace feasts where honey glazed entire lambs, Enkidu countering with tales of chasing ostriches until his lungs bled laughter. They crossed rivers swollen with spring melt, water cold enough to shrink bravado, and scaled cliffs where eagles nested in eyries that smelled of guano and altitude. But then, here's the twist. The elders of Uruk warned that Humbaba's breath was poison, his gaze paralysis. Gilgamesh laughed, Enkidu swallowed the fear and tasted iron. Deep in the forest, cedars towered like skyscrapers wrapped in bark, their shadows cool and resinous, needles muffling their footsteps into whispers. Humbaba erupted from the gloom, 7 auras of terror radiating like heat haze, his voice a subwoofer boom that shattered trunks into splinters. Gilgamesh's knees buckled first, divine blood suddenly thin as watered wine. Enkidu roared back, the sound roar, earthier, yanking his friend upright by the scruff like a misbehaving cub. They fought in tag-team fury, Gilgamesh's bronze axe flashing arcs of sunlight, Enkidu's fists pummeling flesh that knit back together faster than CGI. The monster belched winds that stripped leaves into green confetti, but Shamash, the sun god, sent solar flares to counter, beams lancing through the canopy like stage lights. Hours blurred. Sweat mixed with sap until both warriors glistened like oiled statues. Finally, Enkidu grappled Humbaba's neck, tendons popping, while Gilgamesh severed the head with a stroke that sang through the air. Silence fell, broken only by dripping blood and the creak of settling trunks. They carved the choicest cedars, the scent intoxicating, and dragged them home on sledges pulled by oxen whose bells jingled like victory fanfare. Uruk cheered, bonfires blazing, the air thick with roasting goat and fermented glee. But then, here's the twist. Glory is a jealous mistress, and the gods took notes. Flush with triumph, the duo lounged by the Euphrates, washing monster gore from their skin, water swirling pink around their ankles. Ishtar, goddess of love and war and divine mood swings, descended in a chariot of lapis and gold, perfume preceding her like a red carpet rollout. She offered Gilgamesh marriage, immortality adjacent, and a bedroom menu that would make Caligula blush. Gilgamesh, for once thinking with the head on his shoulders, listed her ex-lovers and their gruesome fates. A shepherd turned into a wolf, a horse whipped until it wept blood. Ishtar stormed off, cheeks flaming hotter than a kill, and begged Anu for the bull of heaven to trample the ungrateful king. The beast descended, hooves cracking the earth, nostrils snorting drought that withered crops in seconds. Uruk's fields turned to dust bowls overnight, children coughing on grit that tasted of divine spite. Gilgamesh and Enkidu met the bull on the plain, its hide gleaming like polished obsidian, eyes red as fresh liver. Enkidu vaulted onto its back, fingers digging into the hump, while Gilgamesh slashed tendons thick as ship ropes. The bull bellowed, a sound that rattled teeth and skulls, and stamped craters deep enough to bury chariots. They wrestled it for a day and a night, muscles screaming, the ground churning into bloody mud that sucked at their calves. Finally, Enkidu seized the horns, twisting until vertebrae popped like knuckles, and Gilgamesh drove his sword through the throat. Hot blood geysered, steaming in the cool evening air, and they carved out the heart still pulsing as a trophy. But then, here's the twist. The gods convened an emergency session because mortals slaughtering celestial livestock break several cosmic bylaws. Enkidu dreamed that night, Anu's voice echoing in a void that smelled of ozone and judgment. The verdict. One of the duos must die for the insults to Ishtar and the bull's carcass now feeding Uruk stray dogs. Enkidu woke feverish, skin burning as if branded, a black boil blooming on his thigh like an inkblot from hell. Days bled into delirium. He cursed the gods, the harlot, the cedars, even Gilgamesh in fits of sweat-soaked rage. His mighty frame withered, muscles melting like tallow, the scent of sickness overpowering the incense priests burned in futile clouds. Gilgamesh sat vigil, spooning broth between cracked lips, whispering stories of future adventures that would never happen. On the 12th day, Enkidu's eyes cleared long enough to grip his friend's wrist with surprising strength. The spoke of the underworld, a gray dust bowl where crowns meant nothing and the mighty drank mud, his voice a rasp that tasted of copper. Then he died, body slack as a dropped cloak, the room suddenly too large without his bulk filling it. Gilgamesh howled, a sound that peeled plaster from the walls. and refused to bury the corpse until maggots marched and the stench drove even the flies away. But then, here's the twist. Death wasn't the end of Enkidu's story, merely the commercial break before the darkest act. Grief cracked Gilgamesh open like a geode, revealing raw terror of his own mortality glittering inside. He wandered the wilderness, beard growing wild, clothes rotting off his back until he resembled the friend he mourned. He sought Utnapishtim, the flood survivor granted eternity, crossing deserts where the sun baked mirages into mocking water, mountains where snow tasted of iron and regret. Scorpion men guarded the path, their tails arched like question marks. Gilgamesh answered their riddles with tears that froze on his cheeks. He sailed the waters of death, oars dipping into liquid starlight that burned his palms. Utnapishtim, ancient as regret, listened to the king's plea and laughed the way grandparents laugh at toddlers demanding the moon. He offered a test. Stay awake 6 days and 7 nights. Gilgamesh failed before the first sunset, snoring amid loaves baked to mark each lost day, crusts hardening like his delusions, yet mercy flickered. Utnapishtim revealed a plant at the bottom of the sea, prickly as a hedgehog, that restored youth. Gilgamesh tied stones to his feet, sank into the abyss where pressure crushed lungs. And light died and plucked the plant, its spines drawing blood that clouded the water like ink. Surfacing, he clutched his prize, already dreaming of sharing it with a friend moldering back in Uruk. But then, here's the twist. A snake scented the plant's sweetness while Gilgamesh napped beside a cool spring, slithered up and swallowed it whole, shedding its skin in triumphant proof of theft. Gilgamesh wept, not for the plant, but for the finality that even heroes cannot outrun. Skip ahead for the dark ending if you're braced for the gut punch. Centuries later, excavators brushing sand from clay tablets would read how Gilgamesh returned to Uruk, walls still standing, cedars long since carved into palace doors that creaked with every breeze. He ordered the epic inscribed, every wrestling grunt, every divine tantrum, every tear that tasted of salt and loss. Enkidu's spirit lingered in the words, a ghost in cuneiform, raging and loving across millennia. Hollywood would sand off the rough edges, give the wild man a redemption arc complete with slow-motion hair flips and a quip before the final blow. They'd cast a chiseled Australian with a gym membership and a publicist, slap green body paint on him, and call it homage. But the tablets don't lie. Enkidu never asked for a franchise, never signed away his tragedy for a post-credit stinger. History remembers the fight, the friendship, the fevered deathbed curses, while Tinseltown sells the sizzle and forgets the burn. The bull's blood soaked into the earth and grew thorns. The cedar beams rotted and fed termites. The plant regenerated in the deep, waiting for the next desperate diver. Gilgamesh aged, hair whitening like frost on mud brick, until he joined his brother in the dust that fears no king. Yet every time a screenwriter types rage monster with a heart, Enkidu stirs in the silt fists clenching around memories of gazelle races and bronze clashes, reminding the world that the first Hulk didn't need gamma rays. Just clay spit and a friend worth dying for. And in the quiet after the credits roll, when the theater lights rise and the popcorn smells fade, the question lingers like incense. What wild part of ourselves do we tame to fit inside city walls, and what do we lose when the lions no longer recognize our scent? Love carves deeper than any axe, hubris builds higher than any ziggurat, and legacy is the story we leave etched in clay, fragile yet unbreakable, whispering across 5,000 years that even gods envy the brevity of a mortal heart that dared to beat untamed.